Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with ESPN's Kevin Seifert. And Kevin, we're going to play a fun game today because it is June 19th, and there is not a whole lot of big old breaking news. And thanks to Justin Jefferson, we don't have to worry about that and the contract extension during this summertime. So what I want to go through is the things that the Vikings are selling to us and the fans to believe in this team going forward, and whether we are actually buying or selling those things. And I'm going to start in a pretty obvious place. Okay. Are you buying Sam Darnold as QB1? Kevin O'Connell reluctantly revealed that he is the starter for the beginning of training camp. But are you buying into the idea that this team really believes that Sam Darnold could take themselves somewhere this year?
Well, I think it's two separate things there. I 100% believe that he's the quarterback heading into camp, and I think common sense tells us he's the quarterback in week one, assuming health. I guess it's not out of the question that J.J. McCarthy could make so much progress that would become more of a question. But for right now, to me, like that's the obvious situation. Now, do the Vikings think that is that because the Vikings think Sam Darnold can have a career renaissance? I'm sure at this early stage, there's some hope for that. He's done nothing to tell you that definitely can't happen, but there also hasn't been much that's happened so far either. This has all been, most of his passes have been on air. There certainly hasn't been a pass rush that he's had to worry about. All the things that sort of lead to any quarterback struggling, he hasn't had to demonstrate a proficiency against yet. But I think that they still have a reasonable hope that he can play as well as he's ever played, and at least give them some breathing room to get McCarthy ready in a more orderly fashion than would have happened if there was no veteran on the roster. So yes, I'm buying it, but also with the caveat that he hasn't really had an opportunity to play his way out of that position yet.
What I have trouble deciding whether I'm buying is that they think he can really have this career surge. We can't even call it a resurgence because it's never surged. So it would have to.
Unless we go back to college, say he could be as good as he was relatively in college. Yeah.
Or just even somewhat live up to the hype about him coming out in the draft. There was a lot of discussion even at that time that he should have been the number one draft pick over Baker Mayfield and so forth, and then has just never reached that point. And there are examples that you can find when you go through history of guys that didn't have a whole lot of evidence that they could ever be good, and then were suddenly good. And the connection is always supporting cast, coaching every single time. Like even a Kerry Collins or something that kind of flames out in Carolina, reemerges with the New York Giants, and then it's good coaching, it's a good team, it's a good supporting cast. I think I'm leaning toward buying that until I don't have to anymore.
Yeah.
But what I get asked all the time when I go on other people's podcasts and stuff is like, what week is McCarthy going to start? So would you be buying that it's possible that he could start the whole season, or do you think that that's a low possibility?
No, I mean, I think it's a reasonable possibility. It might be less than 50-50, but I think it should be talked about as close to an ideal scenario as the Vikings could have, assuming everybody's healthy and because he's playing the entire year, not because J.J. McCarthy is so terrible in practice or got hurt or whatever, but because he's playing well, Sam Darnold's playing well enough that they think that that's their best quarterback on the roster for the whole year. And so that would be a plus for him and for the Vikings. It's just there's only so far you can go in saying, great surroundings, great coaching. Like the other part of that to me is, whether it was Kerry Collins or I think you talked about Geno Smith the other day, a couple other guys, like those guys were also ready, at that point. They had maybe not been ready. Maybe even if they'd had great coaching and great people around them in their early days, in both cases with the Jets, maybe they still would have played the way they played and played themselves out of jobs. So that's the third part. Like you can have the great surroundings, you can have the great coaching, you can have the relatively pressure-free situation of just being a random free agent off the street, but you still have to be ready yourself. And that's the question Sam's going to have to answer for everybody. Is he ready to do those things and ready to have a career renaissance and capitalize on the advantages that he has, because all that stuff will mean nothing if he's still seeing ghosts, as he famously said, or just like not doing the basic things better than he did before.
So with JJ McCarthy, I've talked about my observations of OTAs and minicamp and so forth, and I'm not sure how much those are going to matter because training camp is so much different. They implore us to call it the learning phase, and I tend to agree with them that I would actually prefer not to. If we were being totally rational about this and not doing a daily podcast, I'd be like, well, why don't we just kind of wait and see what it looks like in training camp? But since that's not how the world works, I've talked about that he looks like he has quite a ways to go. Yeah. What do you expect to see from him in training camp after observing the practices in OTAs and minicamp? Like, do you think that what we saw will just build and build and build and that he'll give a run for his money to Sam Darnold? Or do you think it will look kind of similar where he's more with the backups and we're not going to see real competition there?
Yeah, net, I think it's going to be relatively similar spot, but maybe for different reasons. Like some of the things that we saw him do that you would love to not see any quarterback do, like, hit the ground, have the ball hit the ground against air, just missing people that are just not even being covered. Let's say those things get smoothed out. There's a whole other level of things that come up when you're in pads and when the defense, and especially Brian Flores, is actively scheming against you, and guys are, from a physical standpoint, trying to win jobs for themselves by making you look bad, and all those things that happen in training camp that don't happen in the spring practices per se. Those things could level everything out. So, like, if I don't want to like limit him or have all the McCarthyites feel like we're not giving him a fair shot, but like I really would be pleasantly surprised if we see him make a true run to be the starter in week one. I'm going into it thinking like, we're going to watch him, we're going to measure progress, we're going to see where he's at, but like there's no immediate expectation, both from what they've said publicly and what they're saying privately, I think as well, to think that you could reasonably expect something that dramatic to happen in a relatively short period of time, assuming everybody's healthy this summer.
Okay, one more quarterback one from me. You also have a list that you want to ask me if I'm buying, and then the rest of my questions are much more silly, I think, than this. But with McCarthy, Kevin O'Connell kind of detailed the other day what he wants to see from McCarthy in order for him to make a run at Sam Darnold. And the biggest thing is just mastering the offense. It's very hard to do. And McCarthy was talking about the learning phase and how difficult it could be where you have one good day, one bad day, and all the different footwork that he's got to learn versus what he was doing in college, which is why I always kind of chuckle when people say, oh, well, he came from a pro system. Like there's no emulating this. Right. And so everybody finds that out as soon as they step on the NFL field. Like, oh yeah, this is actually nothing like college. But do you buy that Kevin O'Connell will stick with that standard and that standard only for playing JJ McCarthy? Or could there be a situation where they go 2-4 or something and the Darnold play is what it's been in the past and O'Connell gets frustrated, i.e. playing Jaron Hall last year, and just says, you know what, it's time to play JJ McCarthy?
I wonder if that's why Nick Mullins is still here, because I kind of thought, the first 2 years of the O'Connell Kwesi adofo-mensah era, I think they only carried 3 quarterbacks at any given time, and I think that was because in O'Connell's quarterback mind, like that's how you can't any more than that, and you're losing reps, and there's just not enough reps to give out, and like you don't want to give away anybody that you think you might have a future, but absent of that, you don't just need a fourth arm just to have a fourth arm. So part of me wondered is after they drafted McCarthy, if they would let Nick Mullins go and let him pursue a job somewhere else. But he's still here and they're still talking about him. And I wonder if that's a hedge against what you just talked about. Sam Darnold is not playing well. The team is not playing well. It's a natural time to get McCarthy in, but he's not ready based on what O'Connell's, sort of internal, checklist of things would be. So then you're sort of breaking your commitment to the extent that you could make it by saying, well, what are you supposed to do? Darnold's not playing well. We got to put McCarthy in, and then you're talking about all the things and all the damage that can be done by putting him in before he has mastered it, or before he's in a position where his inexperience is not gonna like really weigh him down more than it otherwise should. So maybe that's why Nick Mullins is here. That if they ever get in that situation and Darnold's not cutting it, maybe you have Nick Mullins do that. I have not had anybody tell me that, but I think there's got to be a reason other than just that they like him as a person, that he's still here, and that they're sharing reps among 4 quarterbacks when you have at least 2 young ones that you'd like to be getting as many reps as you can, and a starter who you need to get as many reps as you can because you haven't played him. He hasn't played in the scheme before.
I could also see Nick Mullins being QB2 very early in the season, just to start the year,
right.
Until they feel like McCarthy is ready to be QB2. And then people will definitely be very upset. But then maybe we can remind them that Jordan Love was not QB2. It was Tim Boyle for a while behind Aaron Rodgers, because they felt he understood the offense better.
And I go back, and I don't know why I was thinking about this, but I was thinking about this earlier today, is that when Dante Culpepper was drafted in 1999, I'm pretty sure he was QB3 that whole year. Like he had been drafted, I think he was number 12 or 11, and he had a really bad preseason. Like the indications in the preseason were that it just, he just wasn't ready yet. And so Randall Cunningham was the starter that year, and they had Jeff George on the roster as well, and they kept him as number 2, and eventually Jeff George ends up playing, and Dante didn't play a snap, or maybe he got like a kneel down or something, and that was intentional. Like they thought they had a competitive team, and they also didn't think Dante was ready, and he spent that whole year as number 3 in a year where like Donovan McNabb was starting and Tim Couch was starting, maybe even Achilles Smith. The Bears had another McNown. Cade McNown. Yeah. I can't remember if he started right away, but I remember he definitely played. And so I think Dante might have been the only guy who didn't throw a pass that whole year. And next year he was a starter, and they went to the NFC Championship game. So it's hard to judge in the moment. Like we all thought he was a complete bust, and this was a terrible draft pick, and they had really mismanaged the whole situation. And it turned out that was a very good thing for him that he didn't get on the field at all that year, while they were trying to, in that year in particular, they thought they had a real shot to go pretty far, and they ended up going, I think, into the divisional round of the playoffs. But that was a great thing for him, and if you could replicate that for J.J. McCarthy, if he needs it, then that would be unquestionably a great thing for him as well.
It will not be easy on Kevin O'Connell if they start 1-5, 2-4. If they get off to a very slow start, it is going to be tough, because Mark Wilf can say all he wants. Well, we trust his decision and everything else. But if he flies in from New Jersey and watches Sam Darnold throw 4 picks, after that game, he's going to be asking, is our rookie ready? Is our rookie ready to go? Yeah. Because patience is a very hard thing to have. But if Kevin O'Connell rides the roller coaster of Sam Darnold, which if you thought Kirk Cousins was a roller coaster, and wait for this. But if he rides that roller coaster and doesn't pull the chute, even if Darnold struggles, I will respect it and defend it, because I think it's better for J.J. McCarthy, and that's what really matters in the long run, not so much how he handles Sam Darnold. And if he goes to Nick Mullins instead of J.J. McCarthy, I can only imagine on your network what the little thing on the bottom is going to say and what Stephen A. Smith is going to be yelling about on TV. But I still will say this, as long as it's better for J.J. McCarthy, that's all that really matters to me, and he should stick with it. But I do think that, and then I want to get to some of yours, I do think that O'Connell has pressure this year, because it's not so much that I think he could get fired if they don't have a great year, but the expectation then going into 2025, or the pressure going into 2025, if he doesn't have a good season, compete for the playoffs, 9-8, 8-9 at least, then there will be this, you got to do it this year with your draft pick kind of right away, or it's going to be some trouble.
It gives me a headache to think about it, because, and we had talked about this, I think probably last summer when we talked about all the pitfalls of deciding or ending up, transitioning in year 3 at quarterback instead of year 1 or year 2, is that, let's say it all plays out. He's in the third year of a 4-year deal, which is my understanding of his contract. They have the season that you're talking about this year. And then, so is he going into a fourth year, or the 4th year with no, as a lame duck? It's not a lame duck in the sense that we know he's gone after the 4th year, but certainly would have. It's not often when an NFL coach goes into a season without at least 1 year remaining beyond that on his contract. So did they give him a contract extension off of that? Off of the first year being good and the next 2 years not being, and then not knowing where the fourth year was going to go. Does he take whatever they would offer him anyway, knowing it would probably be a kind of a low, ball number at that situation? Or do we go into a season where like you're covering a team, you're playing for a team, you're coaching for a team, you own a team where the coach is as minimally committed to as you can be, and so, we'll see if it comes to that. But that's the scenario if you play it out of what you're looking at.
Right. I think that's where the pressure could mount as far as switching over to McCarthy. If you look even halfway decent with McCarthy, it eases some of that going into the following season and so forth. Personally, I think if you have a good head coach who knows what he's doing, that you should stick with that and ride it out and write out your plan unless it becomes a total disaster. But that's just not how the NFL universe works. So what would you like me to buy or sell on your list?
I've got all kinds of stuff on here that flowed out of my brain this morning. But the first thing while we're on it with O'Connell is, do you buy that they're going to emphasize the run more this year, given that Sam Darnold and or J.J. McCarthy and or Nick Mullins are the quarterbacks, knowing the context that basically I think last year they had the lowest percentage of design runs in the NFL. And in the 2-year tenure of O'Connell, I think they ranked number 29 in terms of percentage of design runs. So there's a clear pattern that he produced with Kirk Cousins as his quarterback. Do you anticipate? And they've never said it, so I guess we can't say, are you buying what the Vikings are saying? But are you buying the sort of conventional wisdom that they're going to have to pull back on design throws versus design runs this season?
It's like an implied buy because they signed Aaron Jones. It's not like they just said, who cares who's playing running back? They signed someone who has been one of the best players over the last decade, which indicates we would like to run the ball more and more effectively. It's not even just how much they run the ball for me. It's that they average, I think, yards per carry 28th in the league since Kevin O'Connell took over, which I know the offensive line has not been ideal, but 3 out of the 5 human beings up there are pretty good run blockers. And I don't think Ed Ingram is the worst run blocker. And before that, I didn't think Ezra Cleveland was the worst run blocker. So why hasn't this worked better? I am going to have to be shown this before I truly buy it. I think from a yards per carry perspective, Aaron Jones will do better than Alexander Madison because we saw Ty Chandler do better. And simply being able to read blocks, anticipate, make moves, shred blocks. We just didn't see a whole lot of that from Alexander Madison, as he was mostly ramming into the back of his blockers last season. So it will be better by default because your human being that's playing running back is better. But I just don't see that run to pass ratio changing all that much because it didn't change with Nick Mullins and it didn't change with Josh Dobbs. Even when they were playing low score, close games at times with Josh Dobbs, they just kept passing. I mean, even in the Raiders game where I know Madison got banged up, but in the Raiders game, it's the 0-0 in the fourth quarter. And still like first down pass, second down pass, Nick Mullins coming off the bench. I just think that's who Kevin O'Connell is. I'm okay with that because we saw Zimmer go way too far the other way. But I think that your offense is going to have a ceiling on it no matter who's playing quarterback if you don't at least have that effective run game that teams have to prepare for.
Okay. And that's fair. And you brought up the offensive line there, which dovetails to another question that I had. And this is could be into, it's hard to judge offensive linemen, but do you buy what the Vikings say and what sort of the analytic community says that Christian Darrisaw truly is one of the best left tackles in the NFL, even though he's not made a Pro Bowl or an All-Pro, of course. And again, different metrics, tough to judge offensive linemen. If you look at ESPN's run block win rate and pass block win rate, both of them, I think this past year, Darrisaw ranked 37th in pass blocking and 40th in run blocking. Brian O'Neill, for context, was 3 in pass blocking and 52 in run blocking. So again, like I don't know if that meets the eye test or not. And just because someone hasn't made a Pro Bowl doesn't mean that they're not really, really good. But like, where do we pull from to argue that he actually is one of the top 3 or 4? And it's something that is relevant as we get into his contract extension period, which began after the end of the season.
Yeah, it most certainly is a relevant question. The thing about data outside of the PFF stuff is a lot of it is just being formulated, and I can't contextualize it as well as I can with PFF because I've been using it for a really long time and I understand how they grade, the accuracy of their grades, how it's done, all those sorts of things. And Christian Darrisaw for 2 years now has graded as one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. And to me,
Not
that
tackles, just offensive linemen.
Right, just even offensive linemen, but definitely one of the best left tackles. Now he's not on the same level as Trent Williams, who is maybe the GOAT at that thing, but little shade behind Andrew Thomas, but right in that ballpark as one of the best left tackles. And if we're weighing by positional difficulty, that does put him at the toward the top of all offensive linemen in the NFL. So I look at that metric the most as how often does that match up with how guys get paid, how they kept in the league, so forth. I know because I wrote the book on it, how much the NFL, not just the grades they use, but all the metrics and data, the pressures he allows, a very low rate of pressures, normally a low rate of sacks. Some of that depends on sacks on the quarterback. You can have a good block and then the quarterback holds the ball for 4 seconds or something, but I have looked at him, eye test from my perspective over the last 2 years as matching up with what PFF says about him. I rarely see him get beat on that side. If we do, we really notice because it happens so rarely. Right. So I think that when he goes to the negotiating table, probably next year, I don't think that his people will go try to negotiate this summer, but next year, if he has a similar season, he should be saying, put me up there in that $25 to $30 million range with the best left tackles in the league. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Like, especially I was talking about with the contract, like teams are looking to get deals right now after 3 years when you still have those 2 additional ones that you're under the rookie contract and then a franchise tag after that. So for a team to pony up now, they're looking for a deal, and Christian Darrisaw wouldn't have much reason to be settling for a deal at this point if there's any question about how they value him. And that was how Justin Jefferson felt. They did make him a strong offer, but not nearly as strong as the one he ended up signing a year later. And so that, unless the Vikings just want to give him what he wants and he's willing to take something that probably would be quickly undervalued, then probably not in terms of an extension right now. When I watch him, like he looks like he's playing really well. Like, and then the other part is you say like, how many left tackles in the NFL do I know I would take instead of him? And there's, obviously Trent Williams was the one, and for sure that I think everybody, even at his age, would always want to have. But when I was doing reporting on what it would take for the Vikings to trade up with the Patriots at number 3, and the idea that they were looking for a premium player back, like Darrisaw was the name that I heard kind of mentioned as somebody that the Patriots would consider as part of that package. And so that, the other team's evaluation is always huge. There's teams that haven't had a good quarterback for a generation, and there's teams that haven't had a good left tackle for a generation, and the Patriots might be in that category, and it's really hurt them. And so I think he's good. I just wonder, like, sometimes, especially at offensive linemen, there's a separation between perceived talent and real talent, and sometimes it's a guy with a big personality or a big guy that 6'8" guy or whatever. That just catches people attention. And Christian Darrisaw, for whatever reason, his play has not caught the attention of people who recognize things like Pro Bowl and All Pro and that sort of thing. And so that's why I thought it was at least worth talking about. But like, if you look at it from the perspective of, okay, fine, name me 5 left tackles you'd rather have instead of him, I don't know if I could do that.
Well, I feel the same way, that you're going to have to show me what they're going to do at left tackle if they were to let Christian Darrisaw go. And considering his age, The draft status matches up with his performance. He's now done it for multiple seasons. It was last year one of those, hey, you have to do it over multiple years in order to get the respect. And the Pro Bowl thing, I mean, this is one of the great things about the PFF data is that we no longer have to look at offensive linemen. The only metrics we used to have were his Madden rating and then how many Pro Bowls he made. And sometimes guys would just make Pro Bowls on reputation because how would anyone have watched every single play?
Or make it on his Madden rating.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So after for my book, I talked with an offensive line coach for the Cincinnati Bengals, former offensive line coach, and he took me through his viewpoint on their offensive line grades. Nothing is ever gospel when it comes to the grades. Nothing is ever perfect or captures everything. But as far as giving you a pretty good snapshot of how good someone is, I think with Darrisaw, it matches up and they should make him one of the highest paid guys as long as he stays healthy. I mean, there have been a few times where he's been banged up a little bit, came into the league banged up, but yeah, I think he's pretty terrific. Let me throw one at you. Do you buy that kicking curses could be real? Like, do you buy the idea that the Vikings just can never have now that they've drafted Will Reichard and now that me and Dane talked about how good it looked and the internet went crazy, but how do you believe that there's something intrinsic to this franchise that would cause kickers to have problems?
No, I think that there have been periods of time and maybe extended time where the particular people who populate the organization, and I'm not even talking about one particular coach or one particular front office person or even an owner or whatever, there have been some situations where there have been people who have populated the organization who have made it harder to kick here. And obviously, we can't ignore the impact of Mike Zimmer on Daniel Carlson's short career. Don't know. I wasn't around for the Blair Walsh kind of downturn, so I don't know what went on there. He was really good there for a while. But like Mike Tice, was a really good coach in a lot of ways, but he struggled with kickers too. And at one point they hired in the middle of the year, they hired a kicking consultant to basically be the coach for the kicker because to keep kind of a separation there. And that didn't go so well. And so like Mike used to, to try to create pressure, used to during practice when it was a real special teams drill where you had the defense and the offense on the field, he would just walk across in between where the holder was and the long snapper just to create a distraction and let's see how mentally tough this guy is. And so they had some young guys that didn't handle that well, and they had some veterans who didn't handle it well either over that time. And so I tend to think that there's more concrete reasons why there have been extended periods of time when kicking has been really weird around here. Gary Anderson, when he missed that field goal, it was just a miss, but the next year he came back and he was really, really having a tough season. And it turns out, he gave an interview to Don Banks, who was the reporter at the Pioneer Press at that time, that he was having a lot of personal problems with marriage and his family behind the scenes, and there was some things that were happening that kind of led to that. So I can't discount what's happened with kickers around the Vikings over the decades, but I think there's usually more concrete explanations for why. And frankly, I think it seems like they kind of were done with Greg Joseph, but Greg Joseph kicked better than I thought he was going to kick over those first 2 years of the O'Connell tenure. And I think it's just, they just kind of it's just a more genuinely positive environment, which I think kickers appreciate and benefit from far more than position players typically.
So I think that if you had as many games just with almost any team's sampling of kickers outside of, say, the Patriots, who stumbled upon the best of the best, but if you just had this many games that were relevant playoff games with playoff implications, so forth, that if you took almost any team and put them in those situations, you would have a handful of times where your kicker doesn't come through. It just so happened to be really memorable when it came to this team, and really good kickers had those kicks go wrong. But we don't remember the Kai Forbath kick in the NFC or in the Minneapolis Miracle game, where it's 52 yards with the game on the line. It could have been the game-winning kick, but then the miracle happens. If the Vikings get a 4th down stop against Drew Brees, it's Kai Forbath who is the hero here, right? And then talk about self-inflicted wounds. Rather than just staying with the guy who hit the huge kick, no, we have to go out and draft somebody. Then Mike Zimmer's not happy with that, and then he's got to play psychological warfare with the guy. So is that something intrinsic to the organization? No, that was one guy who was a lunatic about kickers. And even the stuff you're talking about is just so bizarre. Like, why play mind games with a guy who has to be mentally locked in? I mean, it's almost like if you were rooting for your buddy to make a putt, and then you're like, I'm going to help you out by yelling at you or something.
It may not help with this kick, but it'll help, or putt, but it'll help you with the next putt.
Right. I don't think that it works that way. No one does that during a game. Why would you do it then? So the coaches kind of lose their minds when it comes to kickers a little bit, because they can't just tell them, do this technique or let's scheme it this way. It's totally out of your hands. It's one of the bizarre things about football. But I don't believe that Will Reichard is cursed because of the history of the past. If he doesn't kick well, it's because he's not a great kicker.
Yeah.
So far, early returns, I think he does look like a good kicker.
Yeah, like I was thinking about that, put that in something that's going to run in a few days, I think, on ESPN.com, is that like the only thing you can judge about kickers is if they have during spring practice is if their leg is strong enough. And clearly after watching him, and I think you guys talked about it on the earlier podcast, but watching him almost hit the video balcony, which is above the goalposts and behind it. And then the other one was the 60-yarder where he landed it in the net, which is like 10 feet off the ground and 10 feet behind. And so he who knows how long that could have been for. So he has definitely shown us a leg strength that is very good for the NFL. But how he operates and handles pressure situations, we won't know until it happens. And that's part of why it's hard for these guys to deal with it, the coaches to deal with it, because they don't know if this guy is going to crack under pressure until he does, which loses a game. And so we go on forever about kickers. I love the psychology of it, but I think that most people view them as the same way they view officials, is like, I don't want to hear about them. I just want them to do their jobs.
I do think Greg Joseph was pretty clutch. I mean, he missed that one against Arizona in 2021, but he had a bunch of big ones after that. I don't remember ever walking off thinking, oh, great, now we got to go talk to the kicker. We probably didn't talk to him for like 2 years.
Yeah, he had a bunch of, I think I know that in 22 he had a bunch of, he led the league in last second clutch winning field goal, whatever the stat is called, and he tied like John Casey's NFL record for that. So he had a ton that year, including wasn't one of them like 50 some yards to beat in either the Giants game or the Colts game.
Giants, it was like 60 yards.
Yeah, 60 yards. And so like, if he had just been a little more consistent on some of those second and third quarter kicks, then he'd probably still be the kicker. But I thought he established kind of a higher bar than people realize for what Will Reichard is now going to have to be over.
All right, what else you got? What do you want me to buy?
Oh man. Well, I'm happy to talk offensive line, but let me ask you this: like, Shaq Griffin is being discussed as the reason the Vikings are going to be able to play more man coverage this year. As we know, last year, Brian Flores decided to go totally against his style and play mostly zone coverage behind that 6-man front. And it caught a lot of people by surprise, which was good for the Vikings. And it also was what was best for their personnel in terms of what he had to work with. So now they have gone out and signed Shaq Griffin, not to the kind of like multi-year, multi-million-dollar deal you would think it would take to get a cornerback who can play consistent man-to-man coverage. But at least publicly around town, I've heard a lot of people say, well, this year they'll be able to play a lot more man because they have Shaq Griffin. Do you think that's true?
Ish. I'm gonna go with I'll soft buy. I will buy at a low price, but I would not hard buy on that, because Shaq Griffin has a history where a few years ago he was a really good corner in the
Yeah.
NFL, and he hasn't been to that level. He hasn't been horrendous, but he's
Yeah.
just sort of been a guy in the league
Right.
over the last few years. And what I do know about corners is that they're up and down year to year. Sometimes they have great years, sometimes not. There's a lot of other things that play into it: scheme, quality of competition. Sometimes you face the great wide receivers and so forth. He looked good in mini camp, if I could go there. But when your own team cuts you in the middle of the season, regardless of what the reason was, because this guy came back and there wasn't a spot or whatever, like, still, they don't cut players that they really think are fitting in awesome with the team. So that makes me skeptical of that part. The other thing too is that corners get hurt all the time. And I'm not saying he will get hurt, but anybody here. Byron Murphy was banged up last year. If Mekhi Blackmon gets hurt at all, the next man up situation is not particularly good. We saw the more you have a Caleb Evans out there, the more that gets exposed. Andrew Booth Jr. seems to be not a person who exists on this football team. And then past that, we're getting kind of deep into the weeds. I mean, maybe Kyrie Jackson could play right away. He seems to be like a man type of corner, but that's a 4th round draft pick in his first season. Yeah. So if anybody gets banged up, and this happens all the time with corners, where then you have to start shuffling, then I think they're going to have a lot of trouble doing that just based on the personnel. But as far as his history, how he plays, doesn't mean that his man coverage has to be flawless. It just has to exist and be reasonable. So I would say that's their plan. But we also see sometimes that their plan was to have Marcus Davenport and Danielle Hunter pair together. Their plan was to throw back to Dean Lowry's 2021 season. Sometimes these things don't happen with guys who have kind of bounced around. So I'm going to say I get the logic, and I think he might be a good fit for them, but that's one that I have to see to believe.
Yeah, I'm going to buy that they're going to play more man coverage this year, and that's, not hard. That's not like a big breaking news story. I mean, if they played more zone than anybody last year, they got to the end of last year and they were talking about publicly, like, we got to figure out a way to play at least some mix more man in. I think they're going to do that. I just don't think Shaq Griffin is like the hinge on that plan. Like, if he's good, then they'll do it. If he's not good or he's not on the field, then they won't. Like, I think they're going to keep pushing to find ways and see who can give them a look at in man coverage or some version of it or some disguise of it that gives them that chance to not be quite as predictable from a coverage standpoint now that everybody has that year of film to go.
I think what I'm going to think about Shaq Griffin is either, wow, what an amazing signing, or I know what they're getting with the 13th overall pick. Like, that's the only two ways I could go on that. But I do believe that if you ran out the same defense with the same coverages and everything else, that teams by the end of the year sort of knew what was happening there. And that won't benefit them. So they do have to change it up, and they do have to run more man coverage, I think.
And it's going to be fun because I think if you watched, and we knew this already, but if you watch the video of Justin Jefferson's first day behind the scenes with the Vikings, like, he's talking to Shaq Griffin and saying, we're going to go at it all summer long. And like that, like, if you're going to be trying to judge how good Shaq Griffin is because he's, going against Justin Jefferson in every training camp drill, you have to make sure you grade it on a curve. But that'll be good for him because he probably won't have to cover anybody who's more difficult to cover in man coverage in the course of the season than the guy he's going to be with all training camp.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I view this a level above the Bashaud Breeland type of signing. I don't think it's like the total bottom of the barrel. No. They did pay some money for him. Yeah. And according to the internet, they gave up 9 compensatory picks for him and all that. So, whatever. We don't have to go there. I don't think
everything that came out there was accurate, but we'll find out next March for sure.
That's what I don't care. Let me know then. I'm sure they have a chart. Anyway, I want to know if you're buying Winter Warrior jerseys, all white with is the Winter Warriors what it's called? Winter Soldier, Winter Freedom Fighter. What is it called? Winter Warrior?
Winter Warrior.
Okay. All right. Do you buying?
Well, I'm not literally buying. I'm pretty sure I will not be literally buying one.
Know what I mean?
I kind of liked it. I'm glad that they finally, after 2 years of the winter whiteout, which is what they were doing before, just wearing their normal white uniforms at home with purple helmets, that they are now going to have a white helmet to go with it. And I'm probably like the least style driven person that's ever been on your podcast or any other podcast. So if you look at what I wear on for games, you would know that. But I do think that it makes sense to have a white helmet with that, with the white, and I thought it was fun to watch. Notice that they kind of got a nod into Kevin O'Connell's culture shield of the our process, our team, our way, or whatever. That's now emblazoned. That's now a real thing, and it's emblazoned on their uniforms, which is pretty wild. But yeah, I will not be personally buying it because I'm not really a jersey person, and so. But do I like them? I think I'm glad that they. It'll make me sit more freely in the game that we cover, that they have a white helmet with white uniforms instead of purple. So how's that for 2 minutes of filling time about uniforms?
I wanted to ask you because I thought who would be more awkward to answer this question about
Did I
what
get
looks
there?
good. Yeah. Yeah. You were like an 8 out of 10 for
Awesome.
uncomfortable,
Yeah.
especially you clarifying to the audience numerous times that you're not actually purchasing jerseys. I think they know. I think they know that the reporters don't buy the jerseys and so forth.
You said, are you buying? I don't want to. There's a lot of these aggregators that will
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I say, yeah, I'm buying that. Then the first tweet out from whoever will be Seifert says he's buying a white jersey.
I agree with you on the white helmet. I like a little mix up here or there with the jerseys. I just think that if you go too far with that and you're using it too often, then it gets annoying because they have great jerseys overall. And I kind of wish that they would go, and they have done this in the past, but all the time, all white on the road like they used to, with just the like purple band around the sleeves or whatever, and the purple helmet. Sometimes when they go with the purple pants, I just think that looks kind of, I'm not a huge fan of that.
Yeah. Like they wore that for the second week of the O'Connell tenure. So that week 2 game to Philadelphia, and got blown out of town on that one. And I don't know if they've worn it since, except at home for the whiteouts. So either they put a fence around it to only use for the winter whiteout thing at home, or they thought that it was bad luck and they went with purple pants after that.
That's what caused Justin Jefferson. He couldn't tell where he was because he was wearing too much white, and he threw the ball in the back of the end zone.
Yes, that was the reason.
That was the cause. Do you have any more for me? I only have one more for you.
I don't know if this is only just more offensive line stuff, but like, is it real? Do you buy that it's actually possible that the Vikings signed a player who started for them last year to come back and be a backup / compete for 2 of the positions, and that person being Dalton Reisner? Is that like, what do you buy is actually going on with that whole situation? For all the 10 people who want to know about the guard.
Oh, no. This is a guard show.
Is it? Okay.
If we changed it to Purple Guard Insider, it would probably get even more viewership.
Well, I only say that because as at ESPN, like, I cover the Vikings, but what I really do is cover the quarterbacks and the pass rushers. So.
Oh no, there is a commenter who calls himself Guard Guy, because every time the guard comes up, and I get, when I do the fan stuff, I get very frequent questions about what's going on at guard. So this is an extremely relevant question. I am 100% buying that he came back here to just compete in training camp and most likely be a swing guard, because that's where he's at in his career. And eventually he had to realize that he couldn't tweet out highlights of himself and get someone to pay him an ass ton of money. That was one of the silliest things I feel like I've ever seen from a guy. Like, just that's something a UFL player would do. Like, hey, someone pay attention to me. And then, buddy, we know who you are. You've been in the NFL for a bunch of years. Here's the other thing I believe is that other teams were calling up and saying, how about like a minimum salary to compete? Because I think that NFL offensive line coaches want you to be a good run blocker or don't really want you. And I think that's what happened to Reisner, is that it's not that he's just meh at run blocking. He's very poor by the PFF metrics and clearly by what the rest of the league's opinion is. So I think that he didn't have many other options and decided, well, why not come back? And there's a inexperienced left guard. There's a right guard who struggled at times that their patience might run out for him. And also there's 17 games and people get hurt all the time. Yeah, I don't think it's even that different from David Quessenberry. Like David Quessenberry was a starting offensive lineman for a very long time,
Yeah.
but at some point you have two choices. You can either not get a paycheck or get a paycheck and be a backup for somebody.
Yeah,
And
Questenberry's like 33 or something like that, isn't he? But and Dalton Reisner's like 27, 20, like it feels like Dalton Reisner should be in his prime. And like I know that he had, whatever happened contract wise with him in free agency last year ended with him coming in week 4, but he was considered one of their top 2 guards last year. Did they get to the end of the season and evaluate him and think he wasn't, and they thought Blake Brandel was? Or is this just, like they couldn't just bring him in, sign him during mini camp, and then the first day have him be a starter? Like, I guess I'm not buying yet that I mean, everything that the Vikings have done with Blake Brandel says they want to give him a chance to win, or a chance to start. But I guess I'm not buying yet that Dalton Reisner is going to be a backup.
yeah, with the Brandel, he's a guy who was a 6th round tackle and has really not played a whole lot.
He's huge. He's like
handful
6'7".
of snaps.
Yeah.
He is an enormous human being. Maybe that if they're going to run a bunch of power stuff, then having a guy that size would be good. The amount of praise for him, so sifting through praise is hard. So like when someone says Johnny Munt is the best number 3 tight end, you're like, is that a compliment or not? Hey, Kevin, you dress well for a sports reporter. Like, what? Like,
and that's not even true. So we know no one would say that.
Yeah. If you're below average dressing for a sports reporter, it's not good. Yeah. But the point just being, I don't really know, because they have praised the hell out of Blake Brandel for several years. They've also praised the hell out of Jalen Naylor, and, let's see if he makes a single catch or whatever. So, I guess I think it will be a true competition is the way that I would put it. So am I buying that he was brought in to start? Actually, no, because the money wouldn't indicate that. But true competition in and out. They might even switch first team reps during training camp. I think that's what'll probably happen.
Yeah, and like I guess my assessment of interpreting praise from this particular group, like there's some coaching staffs that I've covered when you hear someone say, "Hey, Blake Brandel is great. We love him." It's meant to motivate whoever is above him, to remind that person that, hey, we have a great backup that could take your job at any time. I don't think these guys operate that way too much. I think when they praise people, they're trying to, the Kevin O'Connell thing of like wrap them in our arms of love, or however he puts that. Like, I think they view the compliment and the praise and the optimism as purely to fuel that particular player. So I tend to not look sideways when they are praising people. It may not be because they've reached the level that deserves that praise, but they're trying to get them there. It tells you like that's who they want to be good, or that's who they want that person to feel like they can, take that next step, and that it's believed that they can take that next step. So I think that, all the praise of Brandel was to try to get him to a spot where he's at now, and let's see if he can take advantage of it or not.
Okay, one real quick funny and then a little more serious Are you buying? Our friend Dane Mizutani, the Pioneer Press, regular on this show, claims that he can kick a 35-yard field goal. You buying that?
No, I'm not. That's the easiest one of the day. And I can speak from advice, and not because I've gone on an NFL field and tried to kick, but the Super Bowl was here in 2018, I think. And they have that NFL experience. Every time there's a Super Bowl, they take over a convention center downtown, and they have an NFL experience, and like kids can like run through an obstacle course and like try to throw a ball into a target. And one of the things they have is you can kick a field goal. They have it set up. So I stood in line. This is my great chance to do it without having like NFL players or coaches watching and laughing, or even having to ask somebody who operates a NFL team if I can do it. And I lined up and I did all the things that I've watched kickers do the whole time. Took my 2 steps back, my 2 steps over. I think I even did like the thing where you line it up like this, and then I kicked it, and it went like 4 feet in the air, and like it was hard. I kicked it hard, but it never elevated even to the point where it could have gotten over the crossbar at any point. And that was just one kick, and maybe the second time I could have done better. But like, if Dane is just gonna, for the first time, line up and try to kick a 35-yard field goal, he ain't making it.
Not happening. Not happening. Because I mean, not only do you have to get it up in the air enough, but accurate. No, it's not
Yeah,
going to happen. You
and
could probably practice it for a long time and not be able to do
I
that.
think I could kick it better than I did, which isn't saying much if I practiced a lot, but like still, I don't know that I could make it.
There are some things athletically that I feel like our beat has some people pretty good. Like Ben is a great runner. I
Sure.
have a good basketball shot. We
Mhm.
probably have a good golfer here or there, but kicking it, doing anything on an NFL field is just not for us. So
No.
we just let them do that. The one last serious one is the NFC North being talked about, one of the tougher divisions. I want you to give me something in the NFC North that you are not buying. That like the big narrative about this team, this player, this whatever is maybe a little bit on the overrated side. What would
Well,
that
this
be?
will probably get clipped and sent somewhere, but I don't know if I'm ready to give Jordan Love $55 million a year. And I know like that we have to look at it from not that we're giving him 55 million a year, but we're giving him the market rate for what it would take to sign him to a long-term extension, and that's what you have to decide or not. But like, I mean, he's played a half. He's entering year 5, and he's played a half of a season that's really good. Are we totally on board with him as? I mean, people are already saying, well, the Packers have done it again. You know, Brett Favre to Jordan Love. I mean, Brett Favre, Darren Rodgers to Jordan Love, and like 3 straight Hall of Famers. And I guess I'm just not ready. And the 55 million would signify that the Packers agree that this is the guy. You know, not necessarily is going to the Hall of Fame, but is going to be very much an established starter for a long time. And like, I guess I feel like he did. I can't argue with anything he did in the second half of last season, but is that like enough for us to say definitively that he's the next in line here that should be, you know? And again, maybe they have no choice if they're going to sign him. It has to be for that money after Trevor Lawrence, and just that's just where the numbers are. But like I don't know if I'm buying that like they've found their guy, and like and that 5 years from now he's still going to be the starter.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I was because you have to include how he played in the playoffs and so forth. Buying that he will be a very good quarterback going forward. It may be more of a roller coaster than people expect, or more than Rodgers, who was just super consistent. Maybe it
Yeah.
is more Favre like, where it's interceptions in the playoffs and sometimes great
Mhm.
numbers and everything else. But this is kind of just the price to play poker, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? He knows. What are you going to do? Get rid of me
Yeah.
after you developed me for all those years, and then I was one drive away from the NFC Championship, and then you're just going to not pay me.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit of the issue, and I don't think they'll run into this with JJ McCarthy because they could sit him for 1 year. But when they get all the heaps of praise for developing a quarterback over 3 seasons, well, one, it could also be Brett Hundley, by the way, and he doesn't develop into anything. But
Yeah.
the other, if he does develop into something, then immediately you have to pay him. And that's the conundrum that they're in for the future. But as you see from Trevor Lawrence's structure, he actually doesn't really have a high cap hit for the 3 years.
Yeah.
So they have a window here that they'll still be able to work with. What I am not buying in the NFC North also is regarding the Packers. I don't understand the decision in the backfield. Like moving on from Aaron Jones, maybe there's something medical that they didn't like there. AJ Dillon is bad. Like
Yeah.
I don't think I've never been
They
concerned about
didn't. They
AJ
didn't.
Dillon.
He barely got the minimum, I think, to come back, but still, he's like one of their top guys. You know, along with with Jacobs. So
Which I don't understand really either. I mean, maybe there's something else there, but he just didn't play very well last year. And you're paying a lot of money for that when you have a good passing game. You could get somebody else. I don't really understand that. And the other thing is too that they are selling hard on, hey, you don't actually need a number 1 wide receiver. You could just have a bunch of decent receivers. And I don't know, having covered the Vikings, I think it's actually better to have the number 1 receiver. That's what teams with no number 1 receiver, like when a single guy says, "No, I'd rather be single."
yeah.
Would you really? I
Well,
think you'd rather have
I
a
always
girlfriend.
and this dates me, but like I always go back to what the Packers did the year after Randy Moss's rookie year, and they drafted 3 cornerbacks in the top 2 rounds, and all of them were like 6 feet or above, and so like that's what a number 1 receiver can do. It can make teams change everything that they're doing. There's nobody on the Packers receiving core right now that changes even what scheme you might be running, let alone what draft strategy you might have.
Right, exactly. So, we'll see on that if it actually turns out for them being a true contender or just another sort of good team in the league. Kevin Seifert, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
And, so I appreciate you doing this. We don't have a current milkshake bet. I feel like you struggled so much with them last year that
I'm
maybe
gun shy now.
you need to make the milkshake bet with Dane about the field goal. And then we'll have to do it.
About whether he could make it or not. Yeah.
Yeah, because he'll bet on himself to make it,
Yeah,
obviously.
of course. Yeah. All right. Yeah, maybe that's a good idea.
Okay, we'll do that. Thanks again for all your time. This was really fun
Sure.
as always, and we'll see you soon. Thanks,
Okay.
man.